First Spin. Welcome to First Spin, a show where I learn how to use the Parallax Propeller without having any prior programming experience. And rather than do this on my own, I have enlisted the help of 2.5 experts.
You're counting yourself as a half.
That's right.
It's going to her head, folks.
Look, all I gotta say is when I showed Roy my new code, he asked me if you helped me, Whisker. And I said, oh, ho, ho, no.
Well, I did, because
No.
I explained to you why the nonlinear thing was good, like 40 times, until you tried to bite me, remember?
Perhaps.
And you wrote it completely by yourself, and you didn't ask me any questions, though.
It is true.
While writing it.
And I corrected
will probably explain why Roy and I are going to be able to attack it.
Well, that's fine. No problem. But before
it does look better, though.
Thank you. Before we attack my amazing version 2
Let's bring
code.
people up to speed. Last week, Addie tried to write a game.
Yeah, I did write a game.
First big coding project on the prop.
Yep. I think it's a big coding project.
And she did it in a very linear fashion.
Yes. And I'll show you guys the I'll put a link to the logic flow that I have. It's on it's on our Tumblr page.
Does this one actually have logic flow rather than just a logic stream?
No.
The last one was kind of just like a streaming flow of consciousness.
The last one was a stack filling spaghetti mess that would explode after a few minutes.
Yes, well. Lest that burst of taste overwhelm your senses. It is less spaghetti today, but the flow is still, I think the logic flow is still there.
Yeah, no. Your flow chart that is on the page that I have seen.
The Tumblr page, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Seems to mostly match up with what you have in the main
Mostly.
Well, you left out like display, which is
okay. This is my old. That's the logic flow for my old code. Yeah. So I'll make a new one for the new code, but that is a separate thing. Thing. I actually first, before we went into my code, because I know you guys are gonna have fun with it, is I think you wanted to talk about Prop 2.
A little bit.
Okay.
Just that it's nearing completion to some degree of completion. Chip has been sharing the FPGA file with some of us, so that we can run the emulation of a Prop 2 cog on some readily available, not terribly expensive FPGA boards. And he's been writing detailed information about the instructions little by little and releasing them, and people have been salivating over all of it for a while on the forums the last couple weeks.
Now, can I ask, do you use spin the same way?
Well, the level that we're at now, it's all just PASM.
Yeah.
But as soon as Chip finishes documenting all the instructions in detail, then he's going to start work on Spin 2, which is the unofficial name. It might be called something different, but
Spin, the sequel.
The Spin 2 compiler I'll end up helping a lot with, because I'll be making the open source C++ implementation of the Spin compiler.
The compiler strikes back.
And but one of the things that you'll be happy to hear, Addie, is that I'm sure other people also will be happy to hear, is that it will be very similar to Spin 1. In fact, most of your Spin 1 code will just be able to be recompiled on the new compiler. You might have to change a couple of little things here and there, like the little clock mode stuff and clock xin freak at the top, that kind of stuff, which is specific to the actual hardware. But a lot of all the syntax will be largely the same. There's going to be new commands in Spin 2 that don't exist in Spin 1 to take advantage of all the features that are in the Prop 2. We've been talking about things like having floating point be just built in instead of having to use an object to do it.
Wow.
Well, there's already a bunch of math stuff built into the Prop 2 that didn't exist in the Prop 1, which will help with that. So
what are
it's kind of
what are the biggest improvements, like the most salient
well,
points of
well,
improvement?
it runs a lot faster. It has 92 I/O pins instead of 32.
Overkill
They
much?
the I/O pins are much more fancy. They have pull up and pull down resistor capabilities built in, so
Wow.
you can pull pins high or low as needed.
Okay.
And there's a couple of variations of that. Most of it is based on things like hooking up USB. You can hook up a USB connector to 4 pins
Mm-hmm.
almost directly, maybe just a couple of little extra fiddly bits,
Mm-hmm.
and
So
talk
they no
USB.
longer need the FTDI chip.
Well, they will for some cases, because like the prop ROM doesn't have enough space to have USB protocol implemented, and USB protocol is pretty darn complicated. So what you will be able to do though is make a USB host on the Prop 2 much more easily than on the Prop 1. They did manage to get it to work on the Prop 1, but it was very limited and slow and
Hmm.
stuff. It'll be easier on the Prop 2 to do that kind of thing. Um, it's got much better video capabilities. Um, the I/O pins have Delta Sigma ADC
Mm-hmm.
capability
Mm-hmm.
Nami.
as well as DAC capability.
Very nice.
So you'll be able to have multiple DAC or ADC connections.
So actually,
And
the Prop 2 chip could be a really powerful uh thing for an oscilloscope, right?
well, I mean, to a certain degree, I mean, you're still limited by the frequency of the processor and the sampling of
Mm.
the sampling rate. Most high-end oscilloscopes sample, you know, super high, 10 gigapix, 10 gigasamples or 20 gigasamples, really super high sample rates that you just wouldn't be able to do even
Mm-hmm.
up to. But you could still make a much better prop scope with the Prop 2 than the Prop 1 because it can go a lot faster and it has more capabilities on the pins.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's a lot more that I haven't said, but it's mostly because it's not all in detail documented yet. It's still being documented by Chip little by little.
Sure. And I know the
Uh,
question on everyone's mind then is, at this point, what's the projected date, if any?
well, I'm not in any way, shape, or form an authority on that, but I do, I can say that it's probably going to be next year sometime.
Like
I want,
early in the first
I would
half?
hope. I know Parallax hopes it will be early. It's all a matter of whether or not the, shuttle runs for building the chip are successful or not, and
Sure.
how many times they have to iterate. Because it's a pretty long cycle each time they iterate run to
Mm-hmm.
make a new version of the silicon.
Mm-hmm.
Weeks and weeks. I think the shortest they can get a cycle is something on the order of 2.5 months or
Hmm.
something like that.
Okay.
So every time they miss, it adds a couple more months.
Sure. Sure.
Um, so that's why it's good that they've got this FPGA version out and people are testing it and trying out things and finding issues, and Chip is interacting with everyone and figuring out details and fixing things as they discover them. So it's kind of cool.
Cool.
If you're in at all interested in the low level stuff, it's kind of cool. It's a little bit over your head, Addie, because it's all FPGA and assembler talk. But
Yeah, just a little bit. One day though, one day
one
we will end up
day,
going to first passing.
chasm.
That's
Ah,
right.
yeah.
So we'll see.
But anyway, so it's kind of cool. It just feels like it's getting a little bit closer,
Cool.
a little more
Very exciting.
like I feel like it's going to come soon. We'll be able to play with a board that has a Prop 2 actually on it.
Awesome.
Not in the near future instead
I
of the
am
distant future.
I am waiting for the Prop 2 BOE.
Yeah, well,
Probably a ways
they
down the pipe.
just made the Prop 1 BOE, so it's probably going to be a while before there's a Prop 2.
Oh, but it's an amazing board.
Yeah.
Roy
Well,
actually has some hardware doing how many cogs?
6.
6 cogs of Prop 2 awesomeness.
It will, however, eventually do 8.
Oh
Yeah.
Yeah.
The full one will do 8. The FPGAs just don't have enough logic gates to emulate the chip.
Not enough to handle the cool.
And then the other thing is that the FPGA emulations are at a lower clock rate than full speed. Like one of the versions is for the what they call the DE0 Nano Altera board.
Mm-hmm.
It's a Tesseract or however you pronounce
Tesseract.
that. That company makes Altera boards, and one of their boards is this little tiny DE0 Nano, and you can run 1 cog on it at like 60 megahertz or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's another board that they have called the DE2 1-115, and that one you can run 6 cogs at like 60 or 70 megahertz, something like that. It's
cool.
The board I have is a little bit higher end Stratix board, and I can run them at 100 megahertz, 6 at 100.
Nice. Very nice.
But it's the same exact, I'm doing the same FPGA pretty much as everyone else is doing, the same code being compiled down into the FPGA. So it's, comparable. And I'm using this to help me do the compiler assembler work that I'm doing for Parallax.
Cool. Gotcha.
Yep.
All right. So there are the Prop 2 announcements of the week. So my epic, awesome, super deluxe code.
Yeah.
Okay, so I did a couple of things. One, I took all of the most of the repetitive portions that I could.
Wait. Isn't this a redo of previous pet code? Doesn't that make the whole thing repetitive?
So it looks like you structured this more like a more typical program where you have the main at the top.
You mean like a more awesome program?
That's crazy.
And then you initialize. You call it an initialize function.
Well, that's because Whisker got all angsty over the pre-main. The name of the pre-main, he's like, that's your initialize cog. I'm like, it's just called pre-main. No, that's your initialize cog. You should call it initialize. And I'm like, all right, fine. It's initialize.
Yeah, and then you have the whole rest of your main is inside of a repeat loop, like we talked about, where you could just keep repeating what you want to do over and over again.
Well, it's funny you should mention that because initially it was not in a repeat loop.
I know.
Because I hadn't remembered that. No, I hadn't. When I was fixing the
code. So it would just do one iteration. You'd see your guy appear once and then go away and you'd be done.
Right. And I'd be like, well, where do you go? So then I was like, oh, repeat loop. Okay.
Right.
So.
And I see that you moved all those if hunger, if poo, and if sleep things.
Right. And I tried putting else if or else, I think. And it's something like it gave me an error like end of line. And I don't know what that meant, so I just put if.
Well, it's just that you need to do if and then hang on. Let me bring up just so I explain it exactly. It's else if, all one word.
Oh, one word? Okay, so I put a space in between. That might be why.
Yeah, so if you do, like you have if hunger is less than or equal to 15, do the standby pub, then you have if hunger is greater than 15. Instead of that, you could say else if.
Yeah.
Or you could just say else and take the if. Well, because the reason why else works in that case is because if hunger is less than or equal to 15, it's going to go do standby pub. And if it's not, then you don't have to check because it's greater than 15. So you can just say else, do the hunger pub.
Oh, so I just do else if hunger pub?
No, just else.
Else hunger pub.
Else, and then on a new line, hunger pub.
Oh, see, I didn't know that because I put
else if is
hunger
only
greater.
if you want to check against something, right? And in this
Right.
case, you just want it to anything that doesn't fit the other.
Okay.
Drop
So you're
into
doing one.
this.
All of your checks
I
are
see.
one or the other
Right.
checks.
Right.
Sometimes you might have a check that might be do this if the condition is one thing, and then else if the condition is some other unrelated thing, do something else, right? Instead of them being basically a number where you're just having, if it's below some value, do one thing, and if it's above a value, do
something
a different
else.
thing.
Okay,
right?
well I'll try and see, because last I tried with just else, but I did also have the hunger greater than 15.
Yeah, you need to get rid of all
So
of
right.
the whole part, just else and then
Right.
hunger pub.
So
Right.
I'll try that, and maybe that'll shorten my code even more. And then there's the initialize pub, which did essentially the same thing as what pre-main did for the most part.
Mm-hmm.
And then standby pub, I took off. So I realized that I was setting function, which is the age determinant,
Right.
like in every single one of these standby, hunger, poo, sleep pubs.
Mhm.
So I decided to move that back to
Up to the top
the
loop.
top loop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
And
then, but you still have function as a global variable. And
yes,
normally, the way this would work is that you would pass function into each of these.
it is in each of those.
No, you would pass it in as a parameter instead of, so like right now, function is a global,
Yeah.
but a more modular way to do it to make it a little easier long term, because you're going to eventually want to make this even more complicated and awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Is that you might, instead of just standby pub accessing the global variable called function, you would pass in to standby pub a parameter that is the variable function, and then up in your
Okay,
main
I
loop.
can see your face right. Hey, Addie, you know how on
Face is
almost all the
contorting.
objects that you load up, that other people have written,
Yeah.
that the functions you can give values to them when you call them,
Yes.
right?
So like text start 8, you're
Yeah.
passing an 8 in.
Right.
So it'd be just
Like
like
that.
that, except that you'd pass the function variable.
Okay.
Just like you do text stir function.
Okay. But what functional difference is there in
Well,
passing?
it functionally isn't different at this point,
Okay.
but what it would allow you to do is if you wanted to pass in something other than the value of the global variable function into one of these poo or hunger or standby pubs, you could pass in that and they would draw that instead. Right?
Blink, blink.
So right now, up in your main loop, you're setting function equal to one of 3 values.
Yes. That
Right?
is dependent on the age.
Right.
Right.
Well, you could, um, instead of passing function that's equal to one of those values, you could pass one of those values directly. Like you could have, like, say in the future version of this, the awesome more future version,
Right.
you have a food where if one of your critters eats it, he temporarily looks like a younger version or an older version,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
Well, if you wanted to use these standby pub, hunger pub, and poo pub functions to draw them, it wouldn't work right now because it always uses the global variable function.
Right.
But if you passed in a parameter to make it, if you passed in the function variable to each of these from the main function, then you could alter it up in the main function and they would all change to the different value. Or intermittently, you could make it only change when they're asleep or only change when they're
That's getting into the sort of thing
Mm.
that is the whole reasoning behind why you want to make it modular.
Right.
We'll let that sink in Addie's head for a second, and I'm going to interrupt with so Roy just had like a suggestion of something that this could do in the future. I'd like to hear all of the listener suggestions for what the Propopet should do and what it should support. And I'd like to kick that off with two that I've heard so far. One from our favorite ninja, who says that the Propopet needs to have a GPS attached to it and keep track of how much you have walked it. Okay, and then mine was that it should have an accelerometer so that it can detect if it has Propopet shaken syndrome or not.
Horrible. So horrible.
Oh, those sound awesome.
Yeah. Well, we shall see.
Well, it sounds like it wouldn't actually. You already used both of those modules
Yeah.
before,
Yeah.
so you would just need to hook in some functions to talk to them,
And those
away you
functions
go.
are sitting in a cog, reading off that stuff and modifying one of those global variables. And those global variables, like function here, changes the way that all the other little subroutines work, right?
Right. Now,
See, so as an example of what I was saying earlier, if textr used a global variable,
yeah.
like you're using a global variable, instead of passing in what you wanted it to print,
Yeah.
you would have to set a variable to what you wanted to print and then call textr. And then set, the next line you have to set another string to print equals what I want to print, then call textr. That's kind of what you're doing here. Whereas textr in this case and text dec and text out take a parameter because then they're much easier to use to do different things.
Okay. You know what? That you're just gonna have to let that sink in for a little bit.
Well,
Okay.
it's extremely trivial, and you've done it before.
I see.
Yeah,
And
it's really
if you
easy
were
to do. It's just
load up
concept.
text, your text object, what's it calling?
VGA text.
Right. Load up the actual code for VGA text and look at how the text part of it, the dot text,
dot stir or dot out or dot des.
Look at them in the code for that little driver, and you'll see how the line is written down, and then through that you can see how to make it so that your own functions can receive information when you call them. She's scrolling.
I don't even know where to find it on the Mac.
Oh, she's going through her files to try to find VGA text.
This is like the 40th time I've mentioned that she should have the driver file open that she's using so that she can look at its source code.
Yeah.
You should just get in the habit of doing that, really.
I opened it automatically when she sent me the latest code to look at. I opened all the files it used.
Well, I usually do, but I'm on the Mac right now, so it's all confusing.
It's a little bit harder.
Yeah.
It's easier if you have
okay.
a top tool.
I promise I will look at it and I will figure out how .stir .dec work, and then we'll see.
No problem.
All right.
And then there's one last thing to mention about each of these little standby, hunger, sleep functions. You have these little repeat to loops.
Yes.
Except that your return is inside of the repeat loop, so it's only going to do one iteration of the repeat and then return.
Okay.
And really, you don't even need the return; it's implied.
Well, this is the strange thing. When I didn't put the return, it didn't go to the next thing.
Because you were probably repeating infinitely.
Yeah,
if you add the return and then add the number 2?
No, the 2's always been there.
Okay, then it should have fallen out the bottom.
Right. So I don't know what. Maybe it was because I was changing like 3 things at the same time, and I'm attributing it to the return. But when I put the return, I was like, oh, well, it works now. So, but I will take it out of the repeat loop because that's a little silly.
Well, you don't need the returns at all. The return is really the command is there so that if you wanted to return a value back, you could do it with return.
Manually.
Or if you wanted to exit out early before the end of the pub, then you could use return to exit early. But
like
you don't need it
if
if you're going to call
so and so, then return this thing.
Right.
Okay.
Then return -1.
Okay.
Right. But if you just have a sequence of commands in a pub, after it gets to the end, as long as you don't have it like infinitely repeating or something, it will just return automatically back up to wherever called it.
Okay. So I wanted to also, for the noobs out there who's looking at the differences between the old and the new, in the old one, like for standby, hunger, and poo and sleep, every single time I referenced the data points, I had to like first point it to the first line of that particular like action. So if it was in the sleep pub, then I directed it to the age appropriate sleep line, and then showed the next line after that. But doing that requires you to always check for the age appropriateness. When in the new code, I took out having to check that every single time, and just had it check that one time in the beginning in the main function, and then changed like how I was looking at the code. So instead of looking at it by action, I was looking at it by age.
Right.
And so because the spaces between all of the sleep, eat, poo
all your
were
strings
uniform,
all the way at the end in your dat section.
Right, because they were uniform, then I could say, okay, standby pub is function and then function plus 9. Then hunger pub is function plus 18 and function plus 27. Poo pub was function plus 36 and plus 45. So that took out a big chunk of the code that was also in those pubs.
And one thing that you might consider, because if you think about all of those numbers, 18, 27, 36, 45, 54, and 63.
Yeah.
They're all multiples of 9.
Yep.
And
here's a nice trick. Can you hear it coming, everyone? I can hear it coming like a freight train.
Well, the reason that they're all multiples of 9 is because you've got 9 versions of every one of your things down in the dat section.
Right.
So what you could do instead is have another variable, which is which state or which one it is, right? Or which state it is, I guess. And then offset by that much, right? Times 9.
Yeah.
So you're going like in standby, you have plus 0 because you just don't add anything.
0
and then
times 9 equals
0.
And then you have plus 9, which is 1 times 9, right?
Mm-hmm.
So state 1 is 1 times 9. 9. What's the offset of 9? Which faces are those?
What?
It's the standby. 0 and 9 are the standby faces, right? In your data table.
Yes.
So what you could do is you could say the state is 0, right?
Sure.
So then you could have in standby, you could say function plus state times 9.
Oh, that's too complicated.
And then function
plus state plus 1 plus 9, because they're all two-frame animations.
No. Listen, process this because it's important. This is really clever.
It will save you a lot of work long term.
Wrap your head around it, because
it's exactly the same thing you did with function. It's just one more level deep. That's all it is. You did it with function to get them to be the right age, right? You're choosing which age they are.
Yeah.
By the function.
Yeah.
So you can choose what state they are in another variable, just like function, between 0 and 9.
Yeah.
And multiply it by 9, because all your strings are 9 long or something like that, right?
Correct. So
that's why it all works out, is that your data is all uniformly set up.
That's because I made it deliberately like that.
I understand.
Now take full advantage of it.
So
we're the ones who suggested you do it uniform.
Right. So like
really?
Exactly what you did with function here to make it be the appropriate age appropriate thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
You can do the exact same thing one more time to get what state they're in, whether they're standby, hungry, pooing, or sleeping. And then you can put the state times 9, the state plus 1 times 9 in each of these functions.
State plus 1 times 9.
Because it's 2 frames, right? So you
got one animation state than the other one for every single one of these, right?
Yeah.
And it's 9 further along than the first one.
Yes.
So if your state is 0, 0 times 9 is 0. That gives you the first offset.
Yes.
Okay. And then that 0 plus 1, gives you, 9 further along, right? So the first animation state for any of these, functional states, whatever, is 9 times 0. And the second one is 9 times 0 plus 1. And then when you're in the next state beyond that, it's 9 times
1.
2.
2.
0 and 1, 2, 3.
9 times 1 plus 1. Wait.
No.
It's 9 times 2 and 9 times 2 plus 1.
So we could take it one more further, but that's going to just complicate it, because you could say how many frames of animation you have, which is 2 in this case, and add that into the formula as well.
This is important to wrap your head around because this is how we do data structures all the time.
Right.
Snore.
It's not, once you get your head wrapped around it, it won't be snore. You'll be like enthralled by your own clever.
Because the thing that's really cool about it is if you get this all set up right, it'll be really easy for you to add more states and to add more frames of animation to each state.
Okay.
Because it'll all just be a couple of variables that you change after you go add in more of your text strings at the bottom.
Anyway, we're going to have to give
now you got to change all the code, every line of code to match up, fix up all the numbers.
Yeah.
We're going to have to give her some time to think about this one, obviously.
Yeah.
And that's okay, because we're out of time anyway.
I'm making a face right now.
She is totally making a face right now.
Well, we will help you along, and next week we can talk about that.
Okay.
All right. Well,
you'll understand it.
That's it for us. You guys can find this show every Tuesday evening at firstspin.tv. There's an RSS feed there if you want to listen to it on your phone, in your car, iTunes, whatever. You can also just push play on the page. It's really easy. Yep, that's it. We'll be back next week.
Bye.
See ya.